Chapter 78. The Dark Hours. Upon her arrival at the Ahmed International Airport, in Doha City, Inaz was received by 3 female police officers and taken directly to the lockup. The 3 Arab policewomen didn't allow any passenger to leave the plane until they first escorted Inaz out of the aeroplane. Before taking her, they placed handcuffs on her hands. The Doha International Airport Police had received a message from the Bombay International Airport Police informing them about the extradition of a Sudanese female citizen. The message was faxed as soon as Inaz's airplane took off from the Indian soil. The prisoner girl was kept in a small room for 7 long hours. During that time, Inaz was given a small sandwich and a bottle of water and another bottle of Fanta drink. There was a small toilet inside that telephone booth-like room. From the time her plane left India, Inaz's mind was torturing her with many dark and agonizing thoughts. Her fears and troubles started while she was waiting in the departure hall. She knew she had escaped twice from those evil plots. At the first plot, it was a mere coincidence that Mr. Vijay Alexander happened to be flying at the same time to Muscat City in Sultanate Oman. At the second attempt, again it was by chance she found that young Muslim woman inside the ladies' washroom and killed her and robbed her black burqa and escaped unnoticed by the policeman who was guarding the women's washroom's entrance. Unfortunately, in the third kidnap Inaz found herself ran of all her lucks. She tried the washroom's trick but it didn't work. This time, one of the Indian female police officers had entered with her inside the ladies' washroom and waited in front of the small room until Inaz came out and took her back to the departure hall. Those female police officers followed her until they escorted her inside the plane and didn't leave until the time of the taking off was announced. As soon as they exited the plane, the door was securely closed up. Up to the moment, the aeroplane started taxiing in the runway, Inaz was clinging to the hope that she might be rescued through a divine intervention. She prayed many times and petitioned in hot tears her Lord to save her one more time. But it seemed this time, the heaven shut its door and God turned his face away from her. Inaz could forget any evil done to her except the moment her baby was snatched from her lap and taken away. It was just at the Bombay International Airport entrance that a huge Indian female police officer grabbed her sleeping baby and took her out of her lap. The rough hands of the policewoman caused her baby to wake up and began to cry. It was only at this moment, she was informed that her baby was going to be handed over to her father and she was going to be transferred at the same day to Sudan. No matter how much she cried and begged, her tears fell in stony hearts and her pleadings in deaf ears. After her baby was taken away from her, Inaz was handcuffed and dragged like a criminal inside the Bombay Chhatrapati International Airport. The 3 hours and 10 minutes for the unjustly extradited Sudanese girl were like 310 horrifying days. Her mind was torturing her and her heart was troubling her. She experiencing the mental tremor that an unjustly condemned to death person would go through. She didn't want to accept the fact that she had been separated forever, from her lover and husband Joseph and from the apple of her eye, her lovely and innocent baby Grace. Why the loving and kind God allowed his child to go through such painful separation? What evil had she done in life to deserve such cruel payback? Why she always had to suffer wherever she went? Why she had to be the victim everywhere her feet had taken her? Why nothing good had lasted for long in her life? And why always someone or some people had to come and rob her happiness from her heart and in its place filled it with agony and sorrow? The 7 hours of waiting for her connecting flight in the small lock-up like other 7 centuries of painful and cruel mental and physical tortures. She wept until her body was dried up of any more tears to shed. Inaz knew she was going in one-way trip. Her feet, she concluded, would never again touch the Indian soil. She was told by the Bombay police that she had done serious crime by making those highly offensive recordings. Indian law, she was informed, had zero tolerance for publications that stirred religious conflicts and violence. Due to her provocative recordings and unlawful debate, she was told, many innocent Sudanese Muslim boys and girls were brutally killed and many more got injured. Therefore, Inaz anticipated that the Indian police had already informed the Sudanese embassy about the reason of her deportation. In those dark moments, she remembered her imprisoned father. She thought God might be punishing her for what she had done to her father. At this junction, Inaz recollected his bitter cursings on her and her husband and their yet-to-be-born baby. It was 9:15 p.m., when Joseph began to hear heavy knocking on the outside door of his apartment. Who would be so rude to hammer someone's door in that uncivilized manner? Only a mad person would do such a crazy thing. Those were the thoughts that came to Joseph's mind. No matter who might be, madman or bad man, he had to respond to his knocking. From the first day his beloved Inaz was unjustly arrested and taken behind bars, not a single day had passed without Joseph visiting her in jail. Joseph didn't want his wife to keep the baby with her inside the filthy and rotten Indian jail, but Inaz insisted to take her Grace and breastfeed her. Moreover, the mother knew that she might not be able to sleep at night if her baby wasn't lying sleeping by her side. More than that, Inaz didn't want her husband to miss his classes. She assured him that very soon she would be released and returned home. For that reason, she encouraged him to attend his college as he used to do every day. Every day, after his classes were over, the loving husband went to a restaurant and bought food and soft drink for his wife and took them to her in the jail. Although the Indian jail authority won't allow outside food, still each day Joseph bribed the guards and through them smuggled the food to his wife. Whenever he came, through those bribes, he was allowed to meet his wife and spend time talking to her. That daily routine went on until the night he heard those heavy knockings on his door. Joseph thought his beloved Inaz was released from jail when he saw a policewoman carrying his baby on her hands. Inaz might be so weak to climb quickly the stairs up to the third floor. He then stretched his hands out and received his baby from the hands of the policewoman. The baby by now had fallen asleep again. "This is your child," the Indian policewoman spoke in a husky voice. "Thank you, ma'am," Joseph responded with happy and smiling face. "Thank you for bringing my wife and baby." "I haven't brought your wife. She is still under our custody." Joseph didn't fully grasp the words of the policewoman. Instead of talking to her, he waited for her to explain why did she bring their baby if her mother's still in jail. "Okay, bye," the policewoman spoke those dry words and turned her back and began to march away. Joseph rose his voice and said, "Ma'am, you haven't told me why my wife has sent the baby back to her father. I was with her at the jail today afternoon and she didn't tell me she was thinking to send the baby home." The policewoman stopped, turned her face towards Joseph, and said harshly, "Your wife has been transferred to another prison out of Bombay." The Bombay Jail Authority, most probably, thought the environment in that new prison not appropriate for a baby of this age. The policewoman was told to pass that information to the father if he asked questions. Those officers who were waiting down in their unmarked police vehicle had instructed the policewoman and told her to speak half-truth and half-lie to the father of the baby. "Can I know the name of the jail and to which city my wife has been sent? Such information is confidential. You have to talk to your wife's lawyer or the jail authority if you are interested to know where she has been transferred." "My wife has no lawyer." The jail authority didn't allow her to appoint any lawyer to defend her in court. "Then go to the jail and find out by yourself where is she now." Joseph still had many questions and needed many explanations about the sudden transfer of his wife, but the Indian woman in khaki had already disappeared from his vision. He stood for some time trying to understand what had happened in jail that led the authority to ship his wife overnight to another city. Joseph heard that when the Bombay jails became overcrowded, the detainees would be transferred to other jails in Pune, Nasik, or Aurangabad. Wherefore, he thought, due to overcrowd his wife was transferred to one of those three cities. Having reached that conclusion, Joseph closed the door and took his sleeping baby to the bedroom and carefully put her on the bed. Chapter 79. In Transit. At the time the baby had been brought to her father, her mother's plane had taken off and headed towards the Middle East. That night, Joseph hardly slept for a couple of hours together. His sleep was interrupted by many bad dreams and horrifying nightmares. He was waiting for the morning to come so that he could go to the Women's Arthur Road jail and find out where his beloved Inaz was sent. It was also happened, when the sun of the following day rose above the raging waves of the Arabian Sea, 3 Arab policewomen fetched Inaz out of that coffin-like lock-up room and began to walk her towards the gate of the Sudanese Airways plane. They replaced the handcuffs on her hands before they took her out. It was the final stage in her extradition. Inaz knew she was going directly from the Khartoum International Airport to the notorious ghost houses. One of those concentration camps would be her toilet and grave. Only a few minutes remained between her life and death. If her feet entered that damned Sudanese flying death, she would never see the daylight again. She would be cast into a dungeon which more dark than the color of those who would dump her in. It would be her last stop and tomb. All of a sudden Inaz remembered a girl who went to a similar situation. Just like God had supernaturally injected that memory in her dark and clouded mind. Her mind was suddenly illuminated and enlightened by that divine recollection. Inaz Ahmed Salah remembered the Saudi teenager Rahaf Mohammed al-Qunan who escaped from her Saudi family because of her conversion from Islam. Additionally, she also remembered that she was no longer a citizen of Sudan, but she voluntarily had become the citizen of the world. Accordingly, Inaz raised her voice and began to scream loudly and tell people why she was being transferred from India to Sudan, and what was going to happen to her if she reached her country. The Arab passengers thought she was out of her mind. They just crowded around her and her police female guards and began to gab at them. The 3 policewomen were taken by surprise. 2 of them were the same Arab cops who escorted Inaz from the Qatar plane and took her to the lock-up room and kept her there for 7 hours. All that time she was quiet and easy to handle. Inaz fell on the floor and continued to scream and begged the bystanders to rescue her life. By then the Arab policewomen had overcome the impact of the shock and therefore decided to apply the necessary force to take the Sudanese detainee to her aeroplane. They bended over her and took hold of her hands and feet and lifted her up. Inaz was jerking and twisting her body and rolling around on the empty air. The policewomen didn't let go of her body and began to move her forward. At those critical moments, Inaz saw a white couple standing among the crowd. They were young white man and his pretty young girlfriend. The pretty girl was using her cell phone and taking photos and also shooting a video of Inaz and her police guards. Inaz began to speak to them in English. She told them she was a refugee in India and therefore the Indian police and the Arab police authorities were violating her rights as a citizen of the world and transferring her to Sudan against her wish. She also told them that, because she converted from Islam to Christianity, the Sudanese embassy in India plotted many times with the Indian police and tried to extradite her to Sudan. She further said, if she reached Sudan she would be put to death as an apostate. The white girl at once stopped her shooting and came closer and shouted in a loud voice at the Arab policewomen. You can't abuse a young woman in that inhumane way. She isn't an animal. She is a human being like you and me. She is a criminal. We received orders from the Indian police to transfer her to her Sudanese aeroplane, responded one of the 3 Arab policewomen. Tell me what is my crime, Inaz shouted loud enough to be heard by everybody. The crowded Arabs weren't happy to hear a white woman shouting at their Arab policewomen. None of them had understood what had been said in English. I don't care what is your crime. But I know you are a criminal, otherwise, you won't be extradited from India to Sudan against your will. I am ready to give you the phone number of the UN office in New Delhi. You can talk to them and they would back up my claim that I am a refugee in India. Those last words Inaz had spoken to the Arab policewoman was heard by a top Arab police officer in the Doha International Airport. Give me the number, the senior police officer spoke in a challenging voice. Everyone including Inaz and the white couple turned their faces towards him. He reached Inaz and resumed his challenge, I would call them right away, and if I find your claim to be true, I would stop your transfer to your country and I shall put you in the next available flight to India. He then took out of his pocket a pen and paper and handed them to Inaz. With shaking hands and trembling body, Inaz took the pen and paper from his hands and wrote down the number of the UN office. The pretty white girl resumed her video shooting. Her boyfriend also began to click photos of Inaz and the Arab senior police officer. By then, the crowd was doubled. The Arab senior police officer dialed the number and switched on his cell phone speaker. He wanted to show off rather than prove or disprove a claim. He knew 99% of those Arab passengers were either illiterate or didn't know English. "Hello sir. This is the senior police officer, Musab bin Hamdan, calling from Ahmed International Airport at Doha, Qatar." "Yes sir, how can I help you?" "We have a Sudanese girl here under our custody by the name." "Hold on sir." Mr. Musab bin Hamdan paused and looked at Inaz and then asked her, "What is your full name?" "My name is Inaz Ahmed Salah." Her name is Inaz Ahmed Salah. She claimed she has a refugee status in India. She also said, she has been extradited by the Indian police authority against her wish. She further believed, she would be executed if she reached Sudan. "Just hold on sir. I have to check my computer." 4 minutes dragged by like 4 hours, while the man on the other line was checking his computer and who about to pass the death or life sentence on Inaz. She is absolutely right. She shouldn't be sent out of India without the knowledge of our office. This action of the Indian police is criminal in nature and against the international law and also violation of human rights. Inaz's life is under threat while she is living in India. Therefore, in no uncertain terms she should be sent to Sudan. Upon hearing those saving words, immediately, the beautiful young white girl ran and hugged Inaz and began to cry loudly. Chapter 80. The Narrow Escape. Inaz's life once again was snatched from between the jaws of Islam at the right and perfect time. If the Arab senior police officer, Mr. Musab bin Hamdan, had phoned 35 minutes before or 15 minutes later, Inaz's life was doomed. When he phoned, the UN office had just opened 30 minutes ago. It was 6 a.m. in Doha City and 8:30 a.m. in New Delhi at the time his phone call came in. Also, if that phone call came 15 minutes later, it would have been answered by Inaz's Muslim legal representative, Mrs. Salma Muhammad Ahmed. That evil woman had come 45 minutes late that particular day. Her usual arrival time was delayed due to heavy traffic jam, which was caused by traffic collision. A vehicle collided with another vehicle just 10 minutes away from the UN office. At the time of the accident, she was traveling from her place to the UN office in a double-decker bus. That day, if she knew what was awaiting her in the office, she wouldn't have come. If she was asked to choose, she would have chosen to flee to her native country Bangladesh and hide herself in her village all the rest of her life. That Doha phone call had exposed all the evils she had done to the terribly abused Sudanese girl Inaz Ahmed Salah. The employee who responded to the call and confirmed Inaz claimed was a senior officer in the UN. He was a Hindu. Immediately, after he ended the phone conversation, he went to the desk of Mrs. Salma Muhammad Ahmed and looked into the case of Inaz. He was astonished when he read some pages from the file bearing the name Inaz Ahmed Salah. At once, he carried the file to a high authority and reported the infringement. His boss could not believe his eyes while he was going through Inaz's file. He knew if Inaz reached Sudan, the UN office in India might have been closed by their headquarters in Geneva. Inaz's case was supposed to be accepted from day one. Or at the most, from the same day she was interviewed, her application was supposed to be approved and she should have been sent for resettlement to a Western country within a week time. There was no any reason or excuse to keep such a terribly abused and persecuted girl in India and expose her life to such high risk. And worse than that, her strong case was unlawfully kept pending for such a long time. When the culprit arrived, she found the UN office was turned upside down. She was at once called in and was confronted of the huge injustice and violation of a refugee's rights she had purposely done. It was an intentional and malicious act and very serious crime. She was fired at the spot and a criminal case was filed against her and was referred to the New Delhi Police Authority. That done, the highest authority in the UN office contacted the Arab senior police officer who called earlier and informed him not to send Inaz back to India. Then the UN office demanded that the refugee Inaz Ahmed Salah had to be kept in Doha, Qatar until her resettlement in another country was arranged. Meanwhile, the pretty white girl had uploaded Inaz's video in her Facebook page, YouTube, and Twitter. In short time, her video had gone viral. Thousands of people around the world liked it and shared it through YouTube as well as through other social media and emails. Inaz's sad case received so much sympathy and worldwide support. After the second phone conversation, Inaz was taken out of the international airport in a police car and booked in a nice hotel. The first thing Inaz did, she called her lover and husband Joseph and broke to him the bad and good news. While she was crying and talking to him, Joseph was also crying. Inaz told him how she was kidnapped again by the corrupt Indian police and the mental and physical tortures she went through during those long and lonely hours. She then told him how God intervened again and miraculously rescued her at the last moments. Inaz refused to give credit to herself. She said to her husband it was God who reminded her at the last moment about the case of the Saudi teenager Rahaf Mohammed al-Qunan who had escaped from her Saudi family because of her conversion from Islam. After that, Inaz inquired about their baby daughter. Joseph told her, Grace with him and she was doing well. He then told her, how the Indian policewoman had lied to him by telling him his wife was transferred to another jail and the police authority thought the new confinement wasn't suitable place for a baby of Grace's age. Lastly, Inaz assured her husband that her life was saved and now she was staying in a beautiful and safe hotel at Doha City, in the state of Qatar. Shortly after talking to his wife, Joseph received a frantic telephone call from Mr. and Mrs. Alexander. They told Joseph they were extremely worried and frightened about what had happened to his wife in their absence. Mr. Alexander said, one of their friends in Bombay saw the video of Inaz's forceful transfer in the Doha International Airport and forwarded it to them through the messenger. Mrs. Alexander cried like a baby after seeing how those cruel Arab policewomen dragged and carried Inaz inside the airport. Mr. Alexander shouted and sharply rebuked Joseph for not informing him about the unlawful detention of his wife. If he had phoned him and informed him about her illegal arrest, he said, he would have gotten her released in less than 24 hours. Joseph apologized and told him why his wife and he had decided not to interrupt their marriage anniversary. Nevertheless, Mr. Alexander told Joseph he was going to contact his friend at the CID and find out from him who issued a warrant for arresting the apostate Sudanese girl Inaz and why she was detained, kidnapped, and deported out of India. He further said, Inaz had a refugee status in India and accordingly her arrest and deportation were illegal acts in violation to the international law and human rights. After 4 days, Inaz's video hit a record of 10 million viewers. She was contacted and interviewed through the phone by the Arabic BBC, Al Jazeera, France 24, and CNN. She became famous and popular in short time. In Bombay, young girls went on the streets and protested and demanded justice for Inaz and punishment for those who unlawfully detained her and tried to extradite her to Sudan. Wherefore, her case once again turned the city upside down. Of course, the only segment of the society who didn't show sympathy and support to the unjustly extradited Sudanese apostate girl were those Sudanese Muslim terrorist students. Every time, their demagogues in their satanic embassy plotted the kidnap and deportation of the infamous Inaz, God had frustrated their wicked scheme. 3 times, they kidnapped and attempted to send her to Sudan, 3 times, God snatched her from their hands and turned their victory in utter defeat and great shame.